I loved the quiet silence of late-night drives, especially during winters. There is something special in how the snow carpets the world in such serene silence, and how it gives one an illusion that the road is now for your taming. From 2 years ago, things will never be the same again. It began with a lonely highway stretch through mountains with snowstorm support. It was when I was on the way to college during Christmas, when it needed to summon its final push as things deteriorated further with the weather. It could have easily become one very quiet ride home, but turned into the worst experience in life. I had left campus by 4 to try to get home before midnight. The first few hours proved to be extremely uneventful. By now the sun has set, and world acquired that eerie blue-gray color which only winter nights seems to have. Snow began to fall lightly now. It dusted the road with white as my tires crushed along the pavement. The minutes ticked by, the snow coming harder and harder with every mile, obliterating the view. Not much in my mind until I glanced down at my gas gauge and realized my gauge was really low. My stomach dropped. I had been so excited to get out that I forgot to fill up before I left. Luckily, I saw a gas station way up the road, its neon sign only barely visible through the snow. It looked old, as if it hadn't been touched since the 70s, but I didn't care. I just wanted to fill my tank. I pulled into the station, stopped at the pump. I stepped out into the cold, freezing night air. Not much was audible, so still was the silence that the crunch of my boots in the snow sounded almost unnaturally loud. Filled pretty quickly, trying to ignore how shadows seemed to stretch out unnaturally long under the dim lights of the station. As I went inside to settle my payment, I looked at the far corner of the parking lot and saw a car that is parked. Its engine runs, but its lights are off. In the cab, it was dimmed, in which one could hardly make out which figure is sitting on top. I felt a spasm go up my spine. However, I let it slide, thinking it must be just another tired traveler resting. Inside, a man sat behind the counter, bending over a book. His age looked about in the 60s. His face was weathered. His eyes looked tired. When I got there to pay, he looked up and something crossed his face which I could not interpret. Maybe concern. "You're going west, aren't you?" he asked in a low and gravelly voice. I nodded, hitting my pocket where my wallet is. "Yeah, trying to beat the worst of the storm." He stopped for a moment, closing his eyes a little. "Be careful out there. Weird things happen on this highway at night." I chuckle nervously and didn't know how to respond to that, so I say, "Thanks, I'll keep that in mind." As I walked out of the door, he called after me one last thing, his voice even more somber. "And don't stop for anybody." The warning sent a chill down my spine, but I dismissed it as small-town superstition. I ran back to my car and took one last look around the lot at the vehicle that had been there in the corner. It still sat there, the figure inside still unmoving. I didn't tarry. It was taking speed again on the highway. Snow was swirling in my beams of headlights, and night was swallowing the road. Fresh snow was crunching under my tires as I gripped the wheel tight, trying to keep my hands from shaking. That's when I noticed the lights behind me. They were miles away, almost impossible to see through the snow, but they are coming at me pretty fast. My heart is racing. A minute or two passed and the car was on my bumper, headlight blazing at me in the rearview mirror. I looked over at the vehicle. My stomach hit the floor. It was the same car from the gas station. I thought it was a coincidence, but something didn't seem right with the way they were driving. Because they were tailgating me too closely, I couldn't even see their headlight in my rearview mirror. I gripped the wheel with the knuckles of my hand, turning white as I picked up speed and tried to create some space between us. They too gained speed, swerved across the course of traffic and came alongside of me. I looked cautiously around, catching sight of a driver, man whose face was pinched and one eye almost translucent. Met my glance with empty holes for eyes, but he spoke too, and mouth opened to close again as though it had some life of its own. But he steered his car toward mine. I overcorrected on my tires and skidded onto the ice. I looked around and the car was gone, disappeared like magic. I desperately started digging through the glass. My heart was pounding against my chest. How could that man just vanish in such a manner? The road had no turn, so there was no hiding place. It was absolutely deserted. Road was empty and bare. For the next 20 minutes, I sat there in quiet, switching between checking the road ahead and my mirrors. Maybe it's just my imagination. After all, maybe this much stress from the storm and a threatening warning from the gas station attendant was a good trick on my brain to play. Then I see it again. The car had just been let out, no lights on, and just sat down by my side. Again, he said nothing, but his face was white like a sheet with one of those mask faces. He grasped the steering wheel tightly as if being pulled from nowhere, pushed the car on the road and into the woods. I didn't stop. I was too afraid. Finally, I saw ahead of me the soft glow of a rest stop. Pulling in, shaking hands, I parked under a flickering streetlight. A wave washed over me. The place was deserted, but nothing mattered. I simply wanted to catch my breath. That was when I saw it. Scratched into the frost on my passenger window were 3 words: "Don't look back." My blood froze. No one was around my car. I looked up, but there was none. Only snow and silence. I had not sat there to understand all things, but I started the engine and drove straight through the night, to stop again for getting home. I never knew what happened on that highway to this day, 2 years later. Nor did I ever take the route again, who or what that driver was.
Winter road trips are adventure in and of themselves, freedom in nature. This was one that became a memory I'd rather not recall. This was 3 years ago when my girlfriend Jenna and I were convinced that the perfect short vacation is a scenic route through the Rockies. What we thought would be a romantic drive in the snow turned into something that neither of us would ever forget. We had rented a cabin for the weekend, 6 hours from our town, and this had been the beauty of the ride so far. Snow-topped trees bordered the road and mountains to match some postcard in every view. Now night was beginning to fall, and this storm, which had seemed to have been brewing from the first, was rolling on, and the road now became hazardous. This sudden rapid increase in depth meant that quickly enough, the whole scene was swallowed up in an impossible whiteness. Jenna slept, curled in a blanket on the passenger seat while I focused on the work that had to be done to keep the car stable on the snowy street. The storm was snow-heavy and oddly quiet. The radio had long since gone silent, with nothing at all to penetrate but the hum of the engine, sometimes a groan from the wind. It was when I looked round that I saw him. There was a figure in the middle of the road, lit by my headlights. He wasn't gesturing toward me as if he needed something with which to help himself. He stood there stone-cold stiff, staring directly at us. I floored it. The car skidded on the ice and then froze 1 inch from the figure's body. Jenna sat upright, gasping, staring at the figure in front of us. He was dressed in a big greatcoat and pulled over his head a hood that hid all of his face, but those parts I could see, and they made no sense at all. His skin was so pale it almost had to be whitewashed like the snow around us. And his eyes looked hollow. "Do you think he needs help?" Jenna asked, her voice shaking. I do know a part of me just wanted to keep on driving, yet there he stood out like a sore thumb, and there was no way I'd be able to get away from ever again. I rolled my window down, some even speaking to him against common sense. "Hey, are you okay? Do you need a ride?" I croaked, my voice still shakily. He said nothing for a moment. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "You shouldn't have stopped." Shivers ran down my spine. Before I could say another word, he turned and started walking into the woods. He disappeared into the storm. "What the hell?" Jenna whispered, tightening her grip on my arm. I didn't know what to do. I guess the better half of me wanted to stick around him for safety's sake, while the other half is pretty damned sure something was bad wrong. "We have to go," I finally stated, trying to sound tough. Jenna nodded and I stomped on the gas pedal. The car still didn't seem to want to move, for the tires were merely spinning over this icy road. Panicky was starting to creep into me because I kept trying and retrying, trying again to get us moving. Come on, I said, gripping the wheel hard. Then we heard it. A soft, scraping noise coming from behind the car. Jenna turned round and paled. There's someone back there," she whispered. I think my heart stopped because of what I saw in the mirror. No sight but snow. I pulled out my phone to call for help. Of course, no signal. The scraping grew louder and closer, like whatever it was dragging its feet through the snow toward us. "Shut the doors," I whispered, yelled to Jenna. She hit the lock button fast enough that I could almost hope it was good enough. Suddenly, tremendous thuds jolted the car. Jenna shrieked as a window had something slam onto it. Then there was a face to the glass. This was not the man we saw. This face twisted, close to inhuman, with eyes without depth like black holes. His mouth opened, but no sounds came. This time, however, I floored it, and the car rolled forward with a face disappearing from my window as I sped on by it along the ice of the road. No stopping or looking back would we till we arrived to the cabin. For now, coming, we would be shaking and not slept till that night. The storm had dissipated the next morning, and we had to decide whether to go home or stay the weekend. I was not looking forward to driving through that stretch of road again. However, Jenna convinced me to wait until the roads were safer. I scoured the ground for that man, the figure who crashed into our car when we finally got moving again. There was nothing, no tracks, no sign that anyone had even passed through. That's all we found. A single handprint on the rear windshield, pressed into the frost. No word was ever spoken about that night again. I know only this. No other time shall I ever stop for any man on a winter's road again.
It was one of those late December nights. Air cut through my jacket, biting me with coldness. Snow swirled in headlights like little ghosts. Work has been a long day today. Home along a back road which cut through the mountain pass. Quiet and used little at night, so I like it for that. Being alone with this highway with only sounds alone through which are those humming by the car, and wind's gale force sometimes was kinda still. But something else happened that night, and when I had been riding for some time toward that pass, it had then really built up. A blizzard by the time then had an area to look up the visibility to near nil. My headlights barely cut into a thick white blanket, so I could hardly see what lay on the road beneath it. I only caught faint outlines of trees at the side of the road. I was a bit scared, but I was certainly not going to let that hold me back. I had driven this road hundreds of times. It was when I saw her. She just appeared to emerge from nowhere, standing on the side of the road with her thumb pointed out in that universal hitchhiker sign. I was surprised at first. During a snowstorm? On this road? Yet she didn't dress for the heavy winter coat and boots appropriate to the conditions. She was wearing a light jacket and jeans, hair matted, soaked by the snow. The face was pale, almost sickly, her eyes too large and set too. I slowed a little. My car went on inching jerky. There was something amiss with her or so, and I did not know just what that was. Loneliness probably of highway in this belly of night, with such silent, spooky sound. I should have kept that window of mine shut. "Hey!" I yelled into the storm, my voice muffled by it. "Are you okay?" She said nothing. She looked at me, her look steady, never flickering. Her expression was so impassive. So long a time passed that finally she said in a low voice almost lost on the wind, "I have to cross the pass to the other side," she said. "Can you give me a ride?" It didn't take much of persuasion before I nodded yes. Really weird. And looking back, I don't even know why I decided to pick her up. I was so tired, perhaps wanted someone to talk to. I felt sorry for her, probably. Whatever that reason, I unlocked the door. She climbed up into the passenger seat without once looking up from mine. No word said as again I drove into the storm. The howling was full force now, driving snow in sheets past the car, but inside the car was silence absolute. I tried to keep her engaged in a conversation of empty words. So I asked her where she's going and whether she's staying somewhere. All that would come were very short responses, devoid of meaning. Whenever I'd ask her why she had come here, "I'm going to see someone," she would reply. She'd often glance back at me, and there was this weird kind of expression as if to see me properly. Within a few minutes of driving, something struck me as odd. No tire marks in the snow outside, and knew the road well enough to see what typical automobile tire marks had been made, leaving behind by the passing vehicles. Here, there were none. The road we just traveled behind was eerily devoid of any appearance that seemed as if no one went that way in hours. I glanced over at the girl, wiggling uncomfortably. "Where are you from?" I asked her, keeping it light. Her eyes widened out a little and she blinked slowly. "Just up the road." She said that, but what she said wasn't exactly right. I never could shake the feeling that something was drastically wrong. We headed up the road, and it begins to get smaller and the snow much deeper, and at this point I'm regretting that I actually didn't continue on my way. Now turning around would only make it worse for me. Then I saw something, which makes my stomach turn over. The girl's breath was visible, though the heater of the car is full blast. She seemed not to feel it, and the frosty mist created by her breath appeared in front of her face. I took a glance at her again. Her pale skin looked like unnatural white, almost translucent. Lips are tinted blue, notwithstanding the warmth inside the car. Gripped the steering wheel tighter than I'd ever gripped it. Held firm as I turned to speak to her. "Cold?" I asked, my voice squeaking out shakier than I'd intended. But she didn't answer this one either. Only met my gaze back with an unblinking stare. The minutes ticked by in absolute silence. Then I saw something. Outside the car, a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye moved. It was going too fast to be sure, but I could swear to have seen somebody walking by the car in the snow. My heart stopped. I pressed hard on the brakes and the car slid on the frozen road before I could fully stop it. "What is it?" she said suddenly, raising quiet in her bright voice. "Did you see that?" I shrieked, flaying my head out through the side window, distraught. Somebody was there, some body was following us. There was no reply after so long. Then words did come, chilling. "There's no one outside, they are waiting for you. At the pass." My brain stumbled. What was she going about? By the time I could speak, I barely looked where we were going. Ahead of us, the road was not to a snowy pass now, but into mountains. Then the road ended in sheer drops into deep blacknesses. The road had gone. Slamming the car into reverse was easy, but by this point my hair was standing on end with pure fear. Black was indicated in the rearview mirror. No lights, no road at all, just black behind me. The girl never looked away from me but turned toward me, revealing a smile that wasn't happy or welcoming but was blood-chilling. Unevenly dispersed teeth showing as though they did not belong. "You shouldn't have picked me up," she whispered. Terrified, I floored the accelerator. The car shot forward. The road was gone. I could feel the weight of the abyss pulling out at me. But just as fast as it had come, the road came back. I looked around. Nothing had changed. I glanced to my right, seeing into the passenger seat. The girl was gone. I never saw her again. I was safe inside the city, but that ride on that snow-covered road, I will never forget it. In fact, to this day I still have no explanation to what happened that night, but cannot shake off the idea that I didn't really pick up a hitchhiker. It was perhaps a warning of something a lot darker. One thing for sure is that I'll never stop for another stranger on a snow-covered road again.